Today's video is sponsored by Fabletics. In November of 1943, while the world's attention was focused on the battlefields of World War II, something sinister was taking place in Appalachia. Seems like there's always something sinister taking place in Appalachia. In this episode, we're talking about terrifying events that stretched to nearly a decade that occurred in southern Vermont in northern Appalachia. A remote mountain, a small town, and a triangle, like the Bermuda Triangle. The Bennington Triangle is what we're talking about today. Carol Herrick is the first person that we're talking about today and a precursor to the Bennington Triangle. In November of 1943, Carol Herrick thought he was simply going hunting with his cousin Henry 10 miles northeast of the abandoned town of Glastonbury. It was supposed to be a routine, brief expedition into familiar territory that had sustained local families for generations. Hunting, back when hunting was a thing that a lot of people did to eat and survive. 3 days later, Henry, Carol's cousin, made a discovery that would haunt him for the rest of his life. He discovered Carol's body laying in a small clearing and surrounded by something incredibly disturbing, something that shouldn't have been there. Henry found Carol's body surrounded by large footprints, massive impressions in the soft earth that dwarfed any normal animal's track. But the footprints weren't the strangest part. It was the way that Carol had died. Carol was squeezed to death, and the coroner's report was clinical in the impossibility of this. I mean, how can someone be squeezed to death in the Appalachian Mountains, a hunter with a firearm? Carol Herrick's ribs had been compressed with such a tremendous force that they punctured his lungs from the outside, and his rifle lay nearby, totally unfired. No bullets had been discharged. Whatever had killed Carol had done so with pure crushing strength, and there ain't nothing funny about that. After Carol's body was found, local wildlife experts were consulted, and their conclusion was unanimous and fairly unsettling. They said it was probably a bear, but bears don't tend to squeeze their victims to death. Bears usually maul and slash and bite with their powerful jaws, but they don't embrace their prey in a death hug that slowly compresses the life out of them, crushing them with that level of force. The case was classified as an animal attack, but it still caused a bit of percolation in the thought centers of people since, because seems like a convenient fiction that allows people to close the files without confronting, seemingly impossible forensic evidence, such as being crushed to death. So I don't know. What do you think happened to Carol? The bizarreness of the event just kind of passed everybody by, it seemed, and nobody really paid attention to Carol's death or the enormous footprints surrounding his compressed corpse. This ties into so many legends that you've probably heard before in Appalachia, or just in the West in general, in America, the continent. There's been strange things here for a very long period of time that aren't easily explained. You can explain them, generally speaking, but back in the 40s, people couldn't explain shit. And that's why we're talking about the Bennington Triangle, because this is a long time ago in which if they had DNA evidence and they had modern technology and surveillance and camera phones, this would be a drastically different situation, but it's wrapped in myth and legend, and it's really fun to talk about and learn. There is also local Native American legends and tribes that have avoided this section in which Carol went missing and the subsequent Bennington Triangle folks went missing. It's called the Green Mountains. It's one of the sub-ranges of mountains within the Appalachian Mountains. There's a ton, there's lowlands, there's Catskill, there's Smoky Mountains, the Blue Ridge Mountains, Green Mountains. But it's cursed ground, all right? When will you people learn? And even before the time of Carol, the 19th century brought a wave of violence in the area that seemed to steep from the very stones that make up the geology. On April 4th, 1892, Henry McDowell picked up a rock and bludgeoned John Crowley to death in the small settlement of Fayville, which is just south of Glastonbury, which Glastonbury Mountain is one of the mountains in the Green Mountains. McDowell went to an asylum, escaped from the asylum, and he vanished into the wilderness and then turned into a wild man like the wild man in Red Dead Redemption 2. I'm telling you, that's exactly what happened. Then 5 years later, in October of 1897, John Harbour was shot dead during hunting season, and his killer was never found or never identified and never brought to justice. Yet another wild, crazed, insane man living in the Appalachian Mountains. June is here, which means summer is in full swing. And to be honest, I need activewear that can keep up with my chaos. Fabletics is there for me. It's comfortable, it's versatile, I wear it while recording, I'm wearing shorts right now. Fabletics is pretty great. The fits are good, everything that's supposed to stay in place stays in place. I'm a serial rearranger, if you fellas know what I'm talking about. I have yet to have that problem with anything Fabletics. When you sign up as a Fabletics VIP, you get an insane 80% off your first order. Plus, as a VIP member, you can save up to 50% daily. And somehow also, your VIP membership gives you a monthly credit for a two-piece outfit or something up to $100 in value. Plus, the membership is very flexible. If you can't find anything that you want, you can just skip that month between the 1st and 5th without being charged. And obviously you get early access to new styles, monthly drops, and VIP member only stuff, and a free membership to the Fit app. It's the perfect time to upgrade your activewear game. Click the link down below in the description to get 80% off your first order when you become a new VIP. Thank you to Fabletics for sponsoring this video. So yeah, all this leads up into the Bennington Triangle, and people throughout time in this region and south and north have reported strange phenomena in Appalachia. Dead zones of absolute silence where even insects stop making noise, disembodied sounds echoing from impossible directions. There's even reports of that from the colonial days, plus the constant sensation of being watched by unseen eyes, which is happening to me right now. But that's because that was a meta joke. I'm on YouTube. I'm live right now. Hi. By the way, I will tell my story. I forgot to in the last video. I'm sorry. I totally forgot to. I got way caught up. I'll tell it at the end of this. Okay, guys? I swear to God, all right? So anyways, a lot of strange things occurring. There's also old legends of the Bennington monster in the area. Apparently in the 1800s, there was a stagecoach that was knocked over and it left enormous footprints behind. It's a century-old legend, and with the Bennington Triangle and all these missing persons, people say, you know, they like to make the interdimensional Sasquatch did it. He got him. It's easier to explain it with something, a bipedal creature that stalks the wilderness. It's easier to explain that than just people dying in the woods. So we have the Bennington monster, and we have Carol Herrick, a man who was squeezed to death a few decades after these various sightings and murders of wild men and all this crazy stuff, setting the scene for the Bennington Triangle. Then 2 years later, in November of 1945, our pattern would officially begin in earnest with Mitty Rivers, a 74-year-old guide who knew every inch of the surrounding wilderness, would vanish without a trace during a routine hunting expedition. Sounds a lot like what happened to Carol. Then came Paula Weldon, a brilliant college student whose disappearance would change Vermont law enforcement forever. And then came James Tedford, a veteran who vanished from a moving bus without a trace. Then Paul Jepson, an 8-year-old boy who disappeared from his family's truck. Then finally Frida Langer, an experienced hiker whose body would be the only one out of these victims who would be recovered. So that's 5 people gone in 5 years, 6 people in a little longer than 5 years, including Carol, all disappeared without explanation from the same remote wilderness area that would become known as the Bennington Triangle. But it did start with Carol. He was the proof that there's something bizarre going on up there. Glastonbury Mountain is the primary peak associated with the Bennington Triangle, and this mountain sits on a foundation of Precambrian rock, much like the other peaks in the Appalachian mountain range. Geological formations of the Glastonbury Mountain date back 1.18 billion years to when Earth's most complex life was single-celled bacteria. Kind of like this son of a bitch. You thought I forgot about him, didn't you? But I did. He's a single-celled organism, and he's still got his hands in his little ship. Who knows what he's doing in there? What the fuck? And the Crown Point Geological Survey reveals massive aeromagnetic anomalies running through the mountain and a lot of other Appalachian mountains, like some kind of strange hidden nervous system of mystery. Lion Mountain granite gneiss, aka Mesoproterozoic plutonic rocks, are shot through with magnetite deposits, which creates powerful electromagnetic properties that honeycomb the interior of some of this area with complex cave systems that just also confuse technology. There's some areas that just feel different and they just feel off, and people, hikers, hunters report strange sensations, an inability to navigate. You have no cell service, which is just due to the remote location, or due to some magic properties of some kind of conspiratorial something. I'm not exactly sure. But regardless, it took decades for anyone to really recognize that these aren't necessarily isolated incidents, that these could be something that's connected. And this is where Joseph A. Citro enters the story. In 1992, Joseph Citro was working as a commentator for Vermont Public Radio when he began researching strange disappearances throughout the state. He'd heard fragments of the individual cases we're talking about, the case of Mitty Rivers, Paula Weldon, James Tedford, Paul Jepson, and Frida Langer, but no one had ever connected them to a single phenomenon or a shape, a triangle. Citro made the connection that now leads to our understanding of these disappearances and the legend of these disappearances. He noticed that they all occurred within a specific geographical area. All right, guys, geographic area. Sorry, I said that wrong. He noticed that these disappearances occurred within a specific geographic area and during a concentrated time period and under circumstances that defy a level of rational explanation. Missing 411 before missing 411, basically. And Citro, drawing some inspiration from the famous Bermuda Triangle, coined a term that would capture public imagination for decades to come. He called it the Bennington Triangle. It's a deliberate word association linking Vermont's mystery zone, this little secret Appalachia honey hole of horror, to the world's most famous disappearance zone, that is the Bermuda Triangle. Joseph Citro published his research in Green Mountain Ghosts, Ghouls, and Unsolved Mysteries, and he connected the 5 separate tragedies into what he acknowledged was partly fanciful speculation, and he also included some theories about alien abduction. So, classic book style. You guys think that there's a lot of slop on YouTube? Try reading a book that isn't about a historical... Have you ever tried reading a philosophy book? That's all it is slop. People just make shit up. So the important thing is to take all this with a grain of salt. Sure, legends, myths, all this stuff's fun, but fanciful speculation is impossible to be honest and not acknowledge. Fanciful speculation is what makes things interesting, it's what makes things scary, and it's what makes our imaginations run wild. So there'll be a little bit of that in this, but I'm gonna try to wrap it up into some rationality too towards the end, because I just can't stand it. It bothers me a little bit, but... but me likey though. There's a few other triangles, even in that area, that aren't the Bermuda Triangle, by the way. We have the Bridgewater Triangle in Massachusetts, which shows identical patterns of unexplained disappearances, creature sightings, and electromagnetic disturbances that are clustered in a specific geographic area. There's also the Michigan Triangle over Lake Michigan, which has claimed aircraft and ships with the same sort of inexplicable consistency, and each of these zones show clusters or patterns that defy random probability, which is very interesting. And scientists do have a term for this. It's called spatial clustering. It's when events occur in patterns that couldn't happen by chance. It indicates an underlying cause or some factor that creates conditions that are conducive to the phenomenon occurring. So stick that in your pipe and smoke it. Okay, haters. And in the Bennington Triangle, that factor appears to be a geological factor. Modern research has identified natural phenomena that can cause severe human disorientation. That's infrasound. We talked about this a little bit in the previous Appalachian video. But yeah, the brown note, all right? A low sound that will make your head explode and your mind, trigger panic and nausea and cause errors in your navigation. Certain rock formations can produce infrasound naturally, which can create invisible zones of psychological disturbance. We talked about the Precambrian plutonic mesoproterozoic granite a little while ago as well. Apparently it generates more than just infrasound. The magnetite deposits create localized magnetic field variations that can affect electronic equipment and biological navigation systems in humans. Because if you don't know, we're just electricity. If you didn't know that, we're water and electricity, and I'm poop, a little bit of poop inside of me and pee. Humans, like most other animals, have magnetoreceptive cells that help with spatial orientation. And those cells can be disrupted, and that can eventually lead to catastrophic results. Another aspect in the area are underground cave systems and caverns. Appalachia is full of that. I'm from Front Royal, Virginia, is where I was born, or I guess I was born in Winchester, but I lived in Front Royal for a long time. Just south of Front Royal is a town called Luray, and they have a cavern system. There's so many caverns and caves in Appalachia. It's honestly terrifying, but In this regard, it adds a layer of complexity because a lot of these mountains are riddled with different passages that can channel sound, create air pressure variations, and create dead zones of absolute silence that can bamboozle people or even Smeckledorf them. So there's that, but geology and rock alone do not explain the complete absence of physical evidence when someone disappears. It doesn't account for bloodhounds losing scent trails at specific locations. It doesn't explain why massive search operations involving hundreds of people, volunteers, and military personnel fail to find any trace of 5 different people. Then we get to population density, which makes the statistics even more significant. The Triangle area had minimal foot traffic in the 1940s. A few hunting parties, some occasional hikers, seasonal workers. The probability of 5 people simultaneously falling victim to natural hazards in such a sparsely populated area is 0. Again, guys, another 0 out there. This is where you get to the comparison of the other triangle phenomena where that becomes crucial. The Bermuda Triangle is very sensationalized. It has a crazy reputation, and I believe I've read multiple times that there is no statistical difference in terms of things going missing in the Bermuda Triangle than anywhere else in the Atlantic Ocean, which isn't very fun, but still, the stuff does go missing there, and maybe there has been a couple different statistical anomalies in aircraft and ships disappearing there. Maybe I'll have to do more research, a bigger video on that. I didn't really look into that too much. Let me look at that right now. Let me research that live for you guys. Okay, well, seems like it's just the traffic volume in that area. Things go missing more in the Bermuda Triangle because there are more things in the Bermuda Triangle. But the Bridgewater Triangle does have documented creature sightings and missing persons cases that sort of mirror the Bennington pattern, and the Michigan Triangle over Lake Michigan has claimed dozens of aircraft under mysterious circumstances. So yeah, there's definitely some bizarreness going on, and it's important to talk about. You know, bizarreness, aka geographic zones where normal rules of probability break down, where something in the environment creates conditions that make people vanish without a trace. Totally normal stuff. On November 12, 1945, one of the most qualified men to survive in the wilderness in southwestern Vermont simply vanished into thin air, and his disappearance established the template of impossibility that would be repeated 4 more times over the next 5 years for the Bennington Triangle. Mitty Rivers wasn't just any hunter or guide. At 74 years old, he was a walking encyclopedia of every trail, stream, and landmark within 50 miles of Bennington, Vermont. He'd spent decades leading hunting parties through the treacherous terrain between Woodford and the Glastonbury Mountain, navigating routes that would challenge men half his age, people who are 37. Little quick fact for you there. Rivers was what locals would call mountain bred. He was born and raised in Fayetteville, Vermont, and country so remote that self-reliance was not a philosophy, it is an absolute requirement for even being alive. He was a widower who had chosen to spend his later years doing what he loved most, sharing his intimate knowledge of the wilderness with hunters who needed his expertise to navigate safely through some very challenging terrain in Appalachia, New England. Those close to Rivers who knew him described him with fairly consistent terms like methodical, cautious, and utterly incapable of getting lost. That doesn't seem right. Doesn't seem like people would describe him like that. Did you make that up and put it in the doc, you little trying to make me look like an idiot? I think he did that. Who knows if they actually said that? I don't know. Mitty approached the wilderness with the respect of someone who understood its dangers and the confidence of someone who'd mastered its secrets. And in spite of his age, Rivers remained physically capable and accustomed to the rugged demands of guiding hunters through mountain terrain. So he shouldn't have gone missing. He shouldn't have. It just doesn't make any sense. He's old, for sure, but he's still not the type of person to go missing. The hunting party that set out consisted of 4 men, including Rivers' own son-in-law, a family connection that made the day's events even more devastating for the group. They were hunting in the Bickford Hollow area, also known locally as Hell Hollow Brook, or Hell Holler Brook. It's approximately 4 miles west of Bennington near the base of Glastonbury Mountain. At around 4 o'clock in the afternoon, the group was making their way through a holler when Rivers moved ahead of the other hunters. It's a hollow. We're in Vermont, let's be real. It was a routine decision. Guides often scout ahead to identify best routes or locate promising hunting spots for the hunters that are paying them to be good at what they're doing and paying them to, you know, get put on a big old monster buck, swamp donkey out there. Rivers told the others he'd meet them at a predetermined location further up the trail, so he walked ahead into the forest and simply ceased to exist, I guess. That's fucked up to say, but that's what happened, it seems like. So some time goes on, and when Rivers failed to appear at the meeting point, the other hunters weren't initially concerned. Experienced guides can sometimes take longer to scout terrain, to track promising signs, or, you know, just be good at their job. It's not just A to B. But as the minutes turned into an hour, and an hour turned into 2 hours, concern became alarm. The hunters began searching until darkness made further efforts impossible, calling Rivers' name and retracing their steps. They found nothing at all. No response, no tracks, no sign that Rivers had ever even passed through the area ahead of them. So after the disappearance, what followed was the largest civilian search mobilization in the history of Vermont up until that point. Hundreds of volunteers responded to the call for help, which transformed the remote holler into a command center of coordinated rescue efforts. Do you say wash or wash? Comment below. Soldiers from Fort Devens conducted the first systematic grid search in state history, and they brought in military precision and organization to what had previously been ad hoc volunteer efforts. You know, people just doing their best to find a local legend. So despite the unprecedented effort, the searchers found almost nothing. A single rifle cartridge was discovered near a creek in the search area, which was the only physical evidence that Rivers had been in the vicinity. Later, a hiker would find Rivers' handkerchief, but by then the trail had gone completely cold. And it was reported that search teams couldn't really find tracks. Rivers didn't leave any tracks. There were no broken branches, no clothing scraps caught on thorns, no signs of struggle, no blood, just no indication of where the man had gone or what actually happened to them. That's reported in headlines from the time. Or was it? I'm unsure. This little guy's a I think he's in on these conspiracies. The assessment of the disappearance was unanimous and disturbing. There was no evidence that Rivers had passed through the forest beyond the point where he'd separated from the hunting party. It was like he just stepped out of reality, guys. How do you lose someone? How do you lose someone like that? How's that happen? It's very tragic, and it's insane that this happens on a consistent basis. There's got to be an explanation. I mean, like, there has to be. It's just, why are all these things myths and legends? I just feel like old guy goes missing. Okay. Old people fall down the steps, too, and break their hips. I mean, what are we talking about? Is it an old guy? He just went missing up there? Seemed like he could navigate pretty good. Bug on my face. But still, he's pretty old, 74, 75. Wouldn't be surprised. But that's not fun, though. That's not very interesting or conspiratorial. The Holy Relic likes it when I like to have fun. But I don't really like having fun. I'm not a big fun guy. I will say, due to his old age, if he did have a heart attack or a stroke, or even if he'd been unconscious for hours, he would have crawled or screamed or something. He just disappeared, which is really bizarre. That is really strange. Because we do have to remember, he was the type of guy that SpongeBob would make a pioneer joke about. You know, pioneers, but I don't remember what the jokes are. So, did he get lost, have a stroke, heart attack, something like that? Some kind of old person explanation? Then maybe wildlife got to him or something? I don't know. It is bizarre that there was not a trace found and that it's still a complete mystery to this day, and they found his handkerchief and stuff. So what do you think happened? Do you think he was just lost and in a bad spot and people couldn't really find him? Maybe somewhere where people wouldn't look or something grabbed him? Or was he taken by the magic forces of ancient time? Because honestly, at this point, reading all these stories, I think I might be starting to get convinced of the other one, but my brain really wants to be like, come on, dude. So the disappearance of Mitty Rivers is the first in the series of the Bennington Triangle. 4 p.m. timing is significant. His disappearance occurred during peak daylight hours under optimal search conditions and in terrain that should have been navigable even for inexperienced hikers. But somehow, even an old country boy, a qualified wilderness guide in the region, vanished completely as if he'd never existed. After his disappearance, the search continued for weeks, then months, as volunteers refused to accept that Rivers could be just simply gone. Families searched on the weekends, hunters kept watch during their expeditions, and hikers reported any unusual findings. The community's response demonstrated how deeply Rivers' disappearance had shaken local confidence in the safety of their familiar little area. 13 months after Mitty Rivers vanished into the Vermont wilderness, on December 1st, 1946, another 4 p.m. disappearance would change everything once again for the worse. And this time it really did change a lot in regard to missing people. This time, the missing was an 18-year-old college student whose disappearance would spawn a media firestorm, a congressional investigation, and literally force the creation of an entire state police force. Her name was Paula Jean Weldon, and she wore a red jacket that would become one of the most recognizable pieces of clothing in American missing persons history. Paula wasn't just any college student, she was the eldest daughter of William Archibald Weldon, a prominent industrial engineer and designer at Revere Copper and Brass Company. I'm sure you've heard of him. I kid. But you've definitely heard of some of the things that he was behind. He had a creative mind. He created things like the whistling tea kettle, cocktail shakers, and copper-bottomed pans. So Paula's family had a social standing, financial resources, and the kind of connections that could demand answers when tragedy struck. Obviously, it isn't fair when you compare it to what happened in 1945, but still, it is the reality of such things. Paula herself, outside of just her family, was also remarkable. She was a 1945 graduate of the Stamford High School. She was pursuing an art major with psychology interests at the prestigious Bennington College. She was described as athletic, intelligent, independent, and passionate about the outdoors. She also had fairly distinctive features, so her looks were memorable to anyone who met her. December 1st was a Sunday, and that afternoon, Paula tried to recruit other students for a hiking expedition. It was an exam period, and her dorm mates at Dewey House were busy with their studies for Bennington College. Dewey House. She was disappointed, but was not deterred. She decided to venture out alone at around 2:45 p.m. Paula changed into a very distinctive piece of clothing, a red parka with a fur collar. She paired that with jeans and lightweight sneakers, which is an outfit that would prove tragically inadequate if she were forced to spend the night outdoors in December Vermont weather. It gets very cold in Vermont. And at 3 p.m., Paula began what should have been a routine afternoon hike. She hitchhiked with contractor Lewis Knapp from Route 67A to his house on Route 9, about 2.5 miles from the Long Trail entrance. And Knapp later described her as cheerful and conversational during their brief ride. And at 4 in the afternoon, the same fateful hour when Rivers had disappeared 13 months earlier, Paula encountered Ernie Whitman, the night watchman for the Bennington Banner newspaper, along with 3 friends in the Woodford Hollow area, which is the same general region where Rivers had disappeared those months before. Paula asked Whitman for directions to the Long Trail, which is a famous hiking path in Vermont that runs the length of the state, and Whitman later recalled that she appeared to be in good spirits, showing no sign of distress or disorientation. She seemed like any college student enjoying a brief outdoor adventure before returning to her studies. And this was the last confirmed sighting of Paula Jean Weldon. Witnesses did report seeing someone matching her description approaching the end of Harbor Road as darkness fell, but these sightings were never definitively confirmed, and if accurate, they suggest Paula may have continued into the Bowles Brook Valley as temperatures dropped towards sub-freezing and snow began to threaten. December in Vermont is cold. It is cold. Second time I've said that. Third time, actually. Sunset occurs at 4:20 p.m. and temperatures plummet rapidly once the sun disappears behind the mountain. And the lightweight clothing that she chose would provide virtually no protection against overnight exposure. So if she were still alive in the wilderness after dark, she would be fighting for survival against hypothermia with inadequate gear and no wilderness experience, which that's another big thing in a lot of these situations of people going missing. Is hypothermia is often an accompanying sort of explanatory measure to why there is bizarre behavior. People take their clothes off. Turns out when you have severe hypothermia, you just start getting your clothes off because you're confused and you don't make any sense. It happens in these sort of situations where people go missing in cold climates and then they're found later on. She was never found. by the way. And when Paula failed to return to her dorm that evening, her absence triggered a response unlike anything Vermont had ever seen. With the disappearance of Mitty Rivers, that was primarily a community concern, but Paula Weldon was different. She was a college student from a prominent family, and her disappearance occurred at an institution with national connections and influential alumni, Bennington College. The college didn't just search for Paula, they closed the entire institution. Classes were suspended as students, faculty, and staff joined the massive search effort in the woods. It was an unprecedented academic disruption that demonstrated how seriously the college and the people involved took the crisis. After this, there was the media attention. Rivers' disappearance had been covered by local newspapers and some regional radio stations, but Paula's case drew what contemporary accounts describe as a small army of reporters from across New England. National newspapers picked up the stories, radio networks provided daily updates, and for the first time in Vermont history, a missing persons case became front-page news across multiple states outside of just Vermont. And this insane media attention revealed something embarrassing about Vermont's law enforcement capabilities. You see, at the time, the state had no professional police force beyond local sheriffs and constables. There was no centralized investigation authority, no standardized procedures for handling complex missing persons cases, no coordination really between jurisdictions. That's why we said it was unprecedented with Mitty when different agencies worked together. Paula's father, William Weldon, the inventor of the whistling tea kettle, was appalled. William Weldon publicly lambasted Vermont for its investigative inadequacy, pointing out that the state failed to keep proper records during the first 10 critical days of the search, and his criticism wasn't just parental frustration, it was an accurate assessment of a systemic and institutional failure of a state in regard to that. This is early on in anybody's ability to investigate, by the way. This is like before a lot of important systems that we have now were put in place. Vermont was very unprepared. Other states had professional police forces with trained detectives and scientific investigative techniques. Vermont relied on a patchwork of local officials with varying levels of competence and resources. And the search for Paula involved hundreds of volunteers and raised a $5,000 reward, which is equivalent to approximately $60,000 in today's currency for finding her. Military aircraft conducted aerial reconnaissance. Professional trackers combed every inch of the suspected route that she took, and bloodhounds followed scent trails that led nowhere. So once again, despite unprecedented effort, and this time despite the media attention, despite the professional resources deployed, the search found nothing. No red jacket, no personal belongings, no sign of struggle, no evidence that Paula Jean Weldon had ever walked the trail. Seemed like public safety was pretty non-existent in Vermont at that time. I'm just gonna be real with you guys. Seems like they were pretty much lacking in every measurable facet. 7 months after Paula's disappearance, Vermont legislature took an unprecedented action. In July 1947, they created the Vermont State Police, a professional law enforcement agency with specific statutory authority for wilderness search and rescue missions. So, there you go. Some level of positive out of that horrible, tragic event. Vermont State Police officials have acknowledged that the force was established largely as a result of the inadequacies exposed by Paula's case. So her disappearance didn't just change law enforcement, it changed how America thought about missing persons cases. Paula's case established templates for media coverage, family advocacy, and public engagement that are still used today. So what happened to Paula? We don't really know. There are some theories, but there is no concise answer to the fundamental question, which is what the f happened to her. Every theory raises more questions than it answers. You got Bigfoot and all that nonsense, or you could consider Fred Gaudet. Investigators eventually discovered that the last person to apparently see or talk to Paula was a man by the name of Fred Gaudet, a man who had just been in a terrible fight with his girlfriend. He was in a jealous rage when he saw her. The young college student walked past his lumberjack work site. He also reportedly told 2 different people that he knew within 100 feet where Paula's body was buried, but when he was pressed and investigated, he dismissed it as idle talk, and they never found a body, and they never found any real evidence of this, so that avenue of investigation was closed. To me, seems like that guy did it. What? He was investigated in 1946 and then subsequently again in 1952 when the case was revisited. But Gaudet, Paul, Fred, that guy, he seems like he did it. I don't think you can slander the dead. He's probably dead. He's probably old as So beyond just Fred, which is a very convincing lead in my opinion, I'm not sure why that's not more more why they didn't dig deeper into that. Some investigators theorize a connection to other cases. Catherine Hall had been found dead in 1943, 7 years after disappearing in 1936, and Connie Smith would vanish in 1952. All were young women, and all had been hitchhiking in New England, and all disappeared under mysterious circumstances. The pattern suggested potentially a possible serial killer, but no concrete connections were ever established. We do know that Paula hitchhiked with a guy to get there, and probably just hitchhiked with a guy to get back. There's also a runaway theory that was thoroughly investigated and debunked. Paula had been having minor conflicts with her father over her future, but the family and friends agreed that she wasn't depressed enough to disappear voluntarily. She made no secret plans, left no notes, showed no signs of preparing for a new life, which people did back then, by the way. You could just run away and start an entirely new life, or you could have another family a town over. The good old days. It's agreed upon that the most plausible explanation was accidental death from hypothermia. Paula was an inexperienced hiker wearing inadequate clothing in December in Vermont, and she'd asked for directions at 4 p.m. when sunset was only 20 minutes away. So if she'd become lost or injured after dark, she would have faced life-threatening conditions with no survival gear. But that doesn't explain why there's just no physical evidence. Once again, hypothermia victims typically exhibit specific behaviors. They remove clothing as their body temperature drops. They seek shelter in cramped spaces. They leave obvious signs of their final hours. Extensive searches were done and found nothing, not a single one of these indicators. So Paula Jean Weldon simply vanished as completely as Mitty Rivers did, despite those two things occurring under similar but different circumstances, one with vastly superior search resources. They tried their best with Mitty, okay, couldn't find him. Tried their best times 3 with Paula, couldn't find her. So the pattern was now becoming undeniable. We have two people 13 months apart vanishing at approximately 4 p.m. from the same general area under optimal search conditions. Both cases defy logical explanation, and both searches fail despite massive efforts and professional resources. Fast forward to December 1st, 1949, exactly 3 years to the day after Paula Jean Weldon vanished in her red jacket. The mathematical impossibility of this timing should also have been the first clue that something was going systematically wrong with the official story of this third person in the Bennington Triangle. James Tedford is our third disappearance, and his would prove even more impossible than the previous triangle cases. This time, the victim didn't vanish from a remote wilderness trail or a familiar hunting ground. He vanished from a moving bus. That's right, a moving bus! James Tedford was a 68-year-old World War I veteran living at the Vermont Soldiers' Home in Bennington. And unlike previous triangle victims, Tedford wasn't an outdoorsman or an adventurous college student. He was an institutionalized resident suffering from documented mental illness, described by family members as despondent about returning to the regimented life of the state-run facility. On December 1st, Tedford had been visiting relatives in St. Albans, Vermont, which is about 90 miles north of Bennington. His family accompanied him to the bus station, witnessed him board the southbound bus, and they watched the bus depart. They were the last people to see James Tedford alive. At 6:15 p.m., the bus made it to its scheduled stop in Burlington, and a brief conversation occurred between Tedford and an acquaintance at the depot, which was the final confirmed sighting of the veteran, and he reboarded the bus for the continuing journey to Bennington. The route was straightforward, 14 scheduled stops over approximately 2 hours of travel time. The bus followed well-established roads through populated areas where there were no wilderness detours, no opportunities for passengers to wander off into remote terrain, no logical explanation for how someone could simply disappear from a moving vehicle. But somehow, between Burlington and Bennington, James Tedford ceased to exist. When the bus arrived at its final destination, Tedford's seat was empty. His personal belongings remained undisturbed. His clothes, a small suitcase, other personal effects, all these things suggested their owner had simply stepped away for a brief moment. Most disturbing was the open bus timetable found on his seat, as if he'd been studying the schedule moments before his disappearance. The unclaimed ticket stub was still there, which is proof that Tedford had paid for passage to Bennington but never actually completed the journey. The bus driver offered a contradictory and ultimately unsatisfying account. He claimed that a passenger resembling Tedford had disembarked in Brandon, Vermont, about 70 miles north of the intended destination and 30 miles south of Burlington, and according to the driver, this passenger had acted queerly and left the bus voluntarily. The police in Brandon investigated the same night and found reports of a man that did fit Tedford's description acting strangely in a queer manner in downtown Brandon, but when interviewed weeks later, no fellow passengers recalled seeing Tedford exit the bus. So the man's missing, and the bus driver says, "I saw him get off in Brandon. He was acting queer. Crazy bastard." So, okay, there's some context, but the case becomes truly disturbing when we realize James Tedford disappeared on December 1st, 1949, but reportedly, James Tedford disappeared on December 1st, 1949, but wasn't reported missing until December 8th, 1949, according to research on the internet. I just can't believe how this is even possible, how this is a thing. He wouldn't be reported missing for a whole week. A full week passed before anyone officially noticed that a resident of the Vermont Soldiers' Home had vanished. Super strange. Veterans' homes are required by regulation to report missing residents within 24 hours, and the facility had strict protocols for monitoring residents' whereabouts, especially those with mental health issues who might be considered flight risks, and Tedford could have fit that criteria. But somehow, Tedford's absence went unreported for an entire week. Multiple staff members had access to Tedford's room and personal belongings during the missing week, and the chain of custody for evidence was hopelessly compromised before any investigation even began, unfortunately. When comparing to other missing residents in the Vermont veteran system, Tedford's case stands pretty far alone. Other disappearances were reported the same day that they're discovered. Only Tedford's absence was allowed to continue for 7 days without official action. And the investigation itself was plagued by anomalies that raise even more questions than answers. Classic Bennington Triangle style. Oh, Bennington Triangle, you do confuse me. This is f***ed up. This is the 1940s. This isn't even that long ago. Sure, it's a really long time ago. Okay, it's a long time ago. It's over 100. It's not 100 years ago. It's 80 years ago. I'm so dumb. I almost said over 100 years ago. I didn't almost say it. I did say it. And I stand by it. I was wrong. Sometimes I hear things and I say things different and something's wrong with me and I don't know what the f it is, and I hear what I'm saying and it's not right and I don't even understand. And sometimes I get on all fours and I run around barking. Something horrible is that despite having detailed route information and a relatively small search area, no systematic physical search was conducted along the bus route between Burlington and Bennington. The investigation remained entirely documentary, which is relying on witness statements and administrative records rather than actual physical evidence. So they never even really looked for him, which is really sad, dude. He fought in the Great War and just was like, I don't know, sad. Then on top of all of that, media coverage contradicted official police statements about the timeline and evidence. Newspaper reports from the period show discrepancies with later official accounts, which suggests either poor communication between investigators and reporters or deliberate misinformation. Then we get the absence of federal involvement. With Paula Weldon's case, it did draw some FBI attention because of potential interstate commerce implications. Anytime something crosses a state line, it becomes a federal requirement for investigation. But Tedford did disappear from an interstate bus route, and that should have triggered similar federal jurisdiction, but the investigation remained purely local, which is sad. So we have our third victim, a man who didn't disappear in the wilderness, but still disappeared in the top part of the triangle with the Bennington Triangle. I'm getting scared. I'm never going to Vermont, I'm just gonna say that. By October 12th, 1950, the triangle pattern had been established. Experienced adults vanishing under impossible circumstances from an area that seemed to specialize in making people disappear without a trace. But on this autumn afternoon, the phenomenon would claim its youngest victim and reveal its most disturbing capability. Paul Buddy Jepson was only 8 years old. The Jepson family lived on the economic margins of rural Vermont, operating a pig farm 3 miles from Bennington Center that sustained itself through an arrangement with the town. They ran the municipal dump, feeding restaurant scraps and organic waste to their herd while providing waste management services to the community. You feed the pigs shit, they eat the shit, and then they shit, and then you use that shit to grow stuff. It's classic. Genius! The Jepson family's pig farm included hard, unglamorous work that kept the family fairly isolated from regular police patrols and community oversight. And the remote location meant that the Jepsons often worked alone, dealing with whatever challenges arose without immediate access or help or supervision. Paul was what would today be recognized as a special needs child, requiring constant supervision and careful monitoring, and he was described as curious and prone to wandering, attracted to vehicles and strangers despite repeated repeated parental warnings about safety. And in an era before modern understanding of developmental disabilities, Paul's needs stretched his family's resources and attention. And on the afternoon of October 12th, Paul's mother drove with him to the family's pig farm operation at the Bennington town dump for routine feeding. At approximately 3 p.m., Paul's mother parked her pickup truck near the dump entrance and left Paul unattended while she fed the pigs. Once again, this was not unusual. The task typically took 30 to 40 minutes, and Paul was accustomed to waiting in the truck during these brief piggy operations. The weather was perfect too for a child to be outdoors. It was a clear autumn day with good visibility and moderate temperatures, suitable for extended outdoor activity. There were no environmental factors that would have made Paul's disappearance more likely or more dangerous. Then we get to 4 in the afternoon, and Paul's mother returns to the truck to find it empty. Paul had vanished without witness or sound. His mother immediately searched the area, calling Paul's name and checking obvious hiding places around the dump operation. And when this initial search yielded nothing, she alerted the authorities and triggered what would become one of the most scientifically revealing investigations in the Triangle history. This search operation was a bit different from previous Triangle cases. Unlike River's mountainous terrain or Paula's trail-based disappearance, Paul's search faced the unique challenge of a dump environment. There was dense undergrowth, scattered debris, and hazardous material that could potentially complicate systematic searching. The search for Paul would produce, up until this point, the most physical evidence for any Triangle case, using the bloodhounds, probably the same ones from the other cases, in all honesty. The dogs immediately picked up Paul's scent from the truck and began following a clear trail through the dump area. Their handlers later described it as one of the strongest, most obvious scent paths they'd ever encountered. Perfect conditions for tracking a missing child. The trail led directly through the dump operation toward a nearby road intersection, and the bloodhounds followed Paul's scent with complete confidence. But then at the highway intersection, the scent trail simply ended. There was no confusion by competing odors or some challenging terrain. It just ended. Completely, instantly, inexplicably gone. Scent trails can fade or be confused with environmental factors. They can get disrupted by rain or heavy foot traffic, but they don't just disappear or stop existing at a specific geographic point as if someone drew an invisible line in the air. But that's what happened with Paul's trail. The police initially theorized that the rain had washed away the scent, but bloodhound experts disputed the explanation. The weather conditions weren't severe enough to cause such complete scent elimination, and the abrupt termination suggested something more unusual than a natural dispersal. The first theory was the vehicle theory, the obvious theory, the possibility that Paul had been picked up by a passing vehicle or a driver, either accidentally or intentionally. The highway intersection would be a logical place for a child to encounter vehicle traffic, and being inside a moving car would certainly terminate a ground-based scent trail. But the theory faced some pretty significant problems. There were no tire tracks indicating a vehicle had stopped at the intersection. No witnesses reported seeing a lost child or a pickup involving a small boy. Most importantly, no drivers had contacted authorities about accidentally striking a child or discovering one in their vehicle. So while Paul's mom was working, he walked from the truck. It was about a 10-minute walk to the intersection. And during the 30 to 40 minutes she was working, some point between then and there, Paul walked to this intersection and disappeared completely. After the bloodhounds lost the trail and these theories, the search expanded beyond the immediate area and started to cover a vast territory radiating out from the highway intersection. Volunteers searched on foot, aircraft conducted aerial reconnaissance, and law enforcement coordinated with surrounding jurisdictions once again to watch for any sign of Paul. Despite these massive efforts, the search found no additional evidence. No clothing scraps, footprints, personal items, no witnesses who had seen Paul after his mother left him in the truck, no logical explanation for how he went missing. So all the evidence they could find was Paul going from the truck to the intersection. That is completely it. There's nothing to suggest that Paul made it to the forest. His scent trail ended at the highway. So maybe he was kidnapped, maybe somebody picked him up. Who the knows? It's horrible either way. This one's so sad and so messed up because Paul was a vulnerable child who disappeared from what should have been a fairly secure family environment under direct parental supervision. Sure, his mom was doing chores or whatever, taking things to the dump. I mean, a lot of people have been in those same circumstances. It's just, it's fucked up. It's always so scary when a child goes just completely missing. It's unbelievable. There are some alternative theories. They're not very good. One of them includes Paul climbing into a delivery truck and just falling asleep, only to be transported away forever unknowingly. That one makes no sense at all. No drivers ever came forward. The only thing that makes sense is if he was just kidnapped or just disappeared into a time slip or whatever people theorize about Appalachia. I'm not totally sure. Just 16 days after 8-year-old Paul Jepson vanished from his family's truck, on October 28th, 1950, the triangle would claim its final victim. This is the case of Frida Langer, but her case is different from the others because she would become the only triangle disappearance victim whose body was ever recovered. Frida Langer was 53 years old and an experienced outdoorswoman from North Adams, Massachusetts, who knew the Somerset Reservoir area fairly intimately. She wasn't a tourist stumbling into unfamiliar territory or an inexperienced hiker making some bum-ass amateur mistakes. The Langer family maintained a cabin on the shores of the Somerset Reservoir and had been making annual camping trips to the area for years. So this is the area in relation to Bennington and the other missing people. This was their backyard. Very familiar with this area. Frida was married to Max Langer, and together they represented the ideal triangle search scenario. They were regular visitors with extensive familiarity with the terrain. They were camping at an established location rather than wandering randomly through the wilderness, and they had family members who could provide immediate witness testimony about the circumstances of their disappearance. If any triangle case could have been solved through conventional search methods, this should have been it. It is also very important to note that Frida suffered from epilepsy, which is a medical condition that could prove central to understanding both her disappearance and the disturbing circumstances of her body's discovery 7 months later. Cold exposure can trigger seizures in some with epilepsy, and her husband Max was acutely aware that this was the case, which made her medical history a critical factor in evaluating what happened to her during her final hours. So on October 28th, 1950, Frida was camping at Somerset Reservoir with Max and their cousin Herbert Elsner. Around 1 p.m., Frida and Herbert set out for what should have been a brief, routine hike from their established campsite. The area around Somerset Reservoir wasn't challenging wilderness, it was flat, looked like this, it was beautiful. The Langers knew the terrain, had established landmarks, and were hiking familiar trails during optimal weather conditions like pretty much everybody else in the triangle. This was recreational hiking, not wilderness survival. During their hike, Frida slipped and fell into a shallow stream and completely soaked her clothing and shoes. It was an unfortunate accident, but hardly a life-threatening emergency. But given the late October conditions and Frida's medical history, getting dry and warm became an immediate priority. Frida told Herbert she would return to camp less than a mile away to change into dry clothes and would catch up with him later. It was a reasonable decision that made sense and demonstrated clear thinking and an appropriate response to the situation. The campsite was, quote, only a few hundred yards from where the incident occurred, and under normal circumstances, the return trip should have taken 15 minutes maximum. Herbert waited for Frida to rejoin him, and when she didn't appear, he returned to the camp to check on her progress, and Frida had never arrived back at camp. What followed was the ultimate test of search and rescue capabilities in the Triangle area. This case had every advantage that previous searches had lacked: a known exact starting point, a clear intended destination, optimal weather conditions, immediate family witnesses, and soft ground that could preserve tracks perfectly. Nothing at all confusing about this in any way. After Frida was officially declared missing, there was a pretty large search response like the other victims of the Triangle history. Unfortunately, and somehow, the search found nothing left behind for Frida. No tracks beyond the stream where Frida had fallen, no clothing scraps caught on branches, nothing, man. No signs that she had passed through the forest between the incident site and the campsite, no sign back at camp. Professional search teams covered the straightforward route extensively and found nothing. They found nothing that showed Frida had ever attempted to return to camp. The soft ground conditions that should have preserved clear footprints showed no trace of her passage. It's almost like she ceased to exist. Then 7 months later, on May 12, 1951, a regular-ass hiker discovered her body near the eastern branch of Deerfield River, and that transformed the Triangle mystery from an unexplained disappearance to a forensic nightmare. Frida Langer's remains were found approximately 3.5 miles southeast of the original campsite, a completely different direction from her intended route back to camp. The discovery location had been only lightly searched previously during the massive search operation, despite being well within the expanded search radius, and this obviously raises immediate questions about thoroughness and coordination and effectiveness of searching. I don't know, dude. The official investigation theorized that Frida had fallen down an embankment into a deep pond where she drowned, with the body being flushed out months later by a spring freshet. And this explanation attempted to account for both the location discrepancy and the preservation problems, but it satisfied not that many people. Some people, I'm not sure. It satisfies me. That does kind of make sense, I've got to say, but like, that's not as much. I don't know. was Bigfoot. I don't fucking know. Regardless, it's an absolute tragedy, and clearly the medical emergency theory is totally plausible. It makes total sense that she's in a shock state, and that could have triggered something, and then she's, I don't know, it's horrible to even think about, dude. No evidence of foul play could be substantiated in spite of the forensic inconsistencies. No suspects were ever identified, no criminal activity was ever proven, and the case was officially closed with the discovery of Frida's body. So Frida became the only triangle victim whose family actually received definitive confirmation of death and then a subsequent burial, but her discovery raised even more questions. It's very suspicious. Specifically with the Bennington Triangle, that's 5 people who vanished in 5 years from a remote wilderness region in Appalachia. Appalachia holds a lot of secrets, and I've heard so many reports of people who have lived in Appalachia, hunted, fished, camped, and it all makes things like this, stories like this, a lot more suspicious. And it makes you want to believe in things that probably aren't real at all, but like, there's no definitive explanation otherwise. Of course, you could use Occam's razor. The simplest explanation is usually the most accurate, which, you know, kid was kidnapped, old man wandered off, the bus guy saw him, he was just crazy and something bad happened to him. First one, I don't know, to be honest. The second, the girl, maybe she was kidnapped. I don't want to speculate, but it's crazy. There's a lot of unexplained and bizarre things that happen in the area, and I don't want to pretend like you're gonna go in there, you're gonna get lost. It's so rare. It's such a beautiful area. I grew up in Appalachia. I tend to believe in things that have evidence that are supported by evidence. I like to think of Bigfoot and interdimensional Sasquatch and all this shit, and like, oh, he walked into a time portal and he transported to the Precambrian era and ate a magnetite rock with some granite gneiss. Or whatever. You know, I like to think about that type of stuff, but largely, I think it's bullshit. That being said, I do have a story. I'm sorry I didn't tell it in the first Appalachian Unsolved video. I apologize. I completely forgot. I don't know why I didn't tell it. But I was 13 years old. I was bow hunting at my grandparents' farm in Gore, Virginia, which is in northwestern Virginia. Not West Virginia, but like a minute, literally a minute from West Virginia. Like actually a minute. You can drive, you can run up 55 and West Virginia's right there. Shithole, by the way. Just kidding. So I went bow hunting alone, 13 years old, had my little compound bow. There's these 2 big hay fields, and there is woods connecting the 2 hay fields. One of them is probably 30 acres, maybe a little bit less. It's probably generous, 25 acres say, and the other one is 5 acres max. And I'm in this little woods area that connects both of them. There's a fence that connects both of the fields, and there's like a gate here and a gate here, and I walk up through the woods. Deer often come out in the smaller field over here. This is a large field. I walk up and then I'm in the corner. So we have woods all around, huge hay fields on both sides, smaller hay field. Deer here all the time. I'm trying to hunt a deer. I'm trying to kill a deer with my bow, okay? I'm trying to harvest a deer. It's hunting season. I think this is the beginning of November or the end of October. Not entirely sure. Things have changed. My memory has definitely faded a bit. I'm sitting in the little woods part. There's a blown down tree. I don't like getting in tree stands. I don't like heights, especially not when I was a little boy, 13-year-old boy. Trees move. It freaks me the f out. But I can see really clearly this way to the small field over on this side. I can't see behind me to the larger field. I could stand up, turn around and see, you know, because the leaves are falling. There's a lot of gaps in space in the hardwood forests. Classic Appalachia, beautiful land. I'm looking, I'm hunting, I'm waiting. I'm just like, I'm not gonna kill anything. There's no way. I want soup. I'm cold. I don't give a f. I'm lazy as shit. I want to go play video games. I don't care. I'm 13 years old. Who cares, dude? Why am I alone? Why are my parents letting me do this? Why are my grandparents letting me do this? And all of a sudden, there's deer in front of me. They spook off, and they're not close enough for me to shoot. They're probably 60 to 75 yards out. And at the time, I was not comfortable enough with shooting that far with my bow. The deer spook off, and there's no sound at all. The sound just completely disappears. And in the fall anyways, there's this phenomenon. I'm not sure if it's studied or has an actual name, but the woods does get more quiet, and the only thing you can hear is like animals running around in the dry leaves in the leaf bed. The trees don't make as much noise because there's no leaves rustling with one another. You can hear things walking, and that's about it. So, but it feels quieter. It feels sharper. The air feels sharper in general when it's cold out. And it was getting dark, and these deer spooked, and I could just feel that sense of sharpness. The air is just cold and it's like nipping at me and I can feel it. And I'm getting goosebumps now thinking about it. I started to feel really afraid, like I was being watched or something. I was not an afraid child. I was not a scared kid at all. I was like so aggro and just so, I don't know, I just wanted to show off is all I wanted to do. And just like, I don't know, I wanted to do good, big. I wasn't scared of anything, really. I'd been bow hunting dozens of times on my own before this, even with a mama bear coming up directly in front of me within 15 feet and looking at me directly in my eyes, and then just its little cubs didn't see me, luckily. But I'm not afraid, okay? That's the point. I'm not afraid, generally speaking. I am now, to be honest, but when I was a child, I was not. Getting freaked out, there's no sound, it's cold, and it feels weird, and the air feels sharp, like it's like a solid almost. It's such an odd sensation that I can't really describe that well. Then all of a sudden, it looked like there was a sheet of some kind of water sheen. I don't really know what you would call it, but the woods in the middle, the field, there's more woods down here, but it's kind of down a hill on this side. It was like here and in this direction where the deer had ran to. It was like this, almost like a wall of rain, but there was no clouds. It was like a weird wall of just flickery air. I don't even know how to explain it, but it was like flickery, shimmery air stuff. And I remember seeing that and just being like, oh, I have to leave immediately. I need to sprint home. And I just booked it. I started running on all fours. Not really, that's bullshit. I started running as fast as I possibly could. I left an arrow behind. My arrow came unknocked as I was frolicking away from the shimmering air of demon alien Bigfoot or whatever. And I did not stop running until I got back to the house. It's probably, I don't know, maybe not quite a mile, probably. Maybe a half mile, 3/4 mile. I'm not sure how far it is, but it was pretty far, enough to where I was very tired by the time I got there. But I just kept running, and I didn't look behind me either. It was one of those things where, you know, you turn the lights off in the basement, you run up the steps. It was that same feeling. Me up so bad. I was so afraid to go in the woods. I remember calling my dad, because my dad was in, I don't think he was in Texas. My mom was in Texas at the time, but my dad, I guess, was home. I remember calling him and asking him, I was like, Dad, have you ever felt really scared while you're hunting? Like, I'm not even sure how to describe this. And he's like, nope, sure haven't, son. You ever seen anything freaky? Ever seen shimmering air? He's like, nope, ain't never seen that either, son. And I was like, all right, well, sounds good. And, you know, obviously this is pre-internet, really, before I guess I was posting videos when I was 13 years old. I started my YouTube channel in 2010. Just a few months later, actually, I posted my first video. That's crazy that this all happened at the same time. Yeah, it traumatized me, though. I still get my butthole puckering a little bit whenever I'm hunting alone. And, yeah, it's strange. It's definitely a story that when I was a kid, I had no idea that it would have any kind of significance or any reference to something like, oh, other people have experienced this. This is just like a thing that kind of happens in Appalachia. What would have happened if I wouldn't have moved? If I would have just sat in that little, in the blowdown in the middle, like, what would have happened? I don't know. What would have happened? Probably nothing at all. I'm probably just seeing things and being insane. But either way, it scared the dickens out of me. My luck, I'd have seen this sumbitch fly in there. I'm going to probe you. I'm going to probe you. No, I'm gonna probe you, you little bend over. Anyways, thanks for watching, guys. Hopefully you enjoyed this video. Comment down below some topics in conspiracies and interesting things you would like to see me cover. I think I'm done with Appalachian Unsolved. There isn't that much, really. Maybe I could do like some kind of cryptid video or something. I have a couple books that I've been reading in regard to that stuff, but yeah, I just want to make more cool videos about things that I'm genuinely interested in. I know everybody's like, call me Chris, you're just ripping off, call me Chris, you're just ripping off, call me Chris. We work together on these videos, just so you guys are aware. You do know we're married, right? We're like a team of people. Nobody actually says that. It's just really fun making this type of content and having Chris help with my stuff and us ideating together. It's really cool. So you'll notice some things in there, but I'm very excited about this and super happy to see people enjoying these types of videos, because I've made a lot of this stuff before and have for years, and It's always been to just kind of supplement what else I'm doing, because it's like a, you know, passion type thing. I'm always worried about what's topical, etc. I'm so grateful. You have no idea how grateful I am that people actually enjoy stuff that I enjoy. I didn't think that it would ever be a thing. I always thought that I'd have to do topical nonsense stuff. I do enjoy the topical nonsense, to be honest. It's fun to talk about. It's slop. But this is like, I get to write for like 3 days. I get to research and write for 3 days straight and just immerse myself in something and then tell you guys. It's awesome. It's me and Tara. Tara edited this whole video and I wrote it and did all the research. So if something's wrong, it's my fault. If you guys enjoy, if you want to see more, press the like button down below. Go to the Gump Club to see an uncensored version of this video and some behind the scenes stuff. And I'll see y'all in the next one. Stay safe out there in Appalachia.